Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, I have the new X24 electric bicycle. This bicycle is the middle of ENGWE's new flagship lineup that includes the X20, X24, and X26. In this case, I don't really have much of the information about the bicycle because nothing's available yet on the internet. So I'm gonna unbox it, assemble it, and start to learn a little bit about it. And I'll share what I learned with you guys in this video. As packaged, this box came in at 109 pounds. So this is heavier than the M20 that I have back there. So I'm curious to see what they have in this bike that makes it that much heavier. It opened up pretty easy. Everything seems to be packaged up pretty good, including this. Is this a passenger seat? I am curious to see if the X24 is actually designed for two people, a driver and a passenger. If that's the case, this thing would be perfect to haul around one of my kids. And that's a front seat, so it looks like we at least have two seat pads for the bike. To protect your... This thing is packed up pretty nice. There's actually more better fitting foam than I'm used to for a bike like this. Check out how the fork and the stem are in this nice little purpose-built foam case that'll keep it from banging around while it's shipping. Because this is a 24-inch bike, I didn't actually expect it to be as big. I didn't expect it to be as big as it actually is. Let's take about 8 seconds to gently remove all the zip ties holding the packaging together for this bicycle. So I like this neoprene cable protector for the handlebar cables. All the cables going from the frame to the handlebars have this nice neoprene protector. And that's a beefy main power cable. This is a power cable that connects into the battery, so I'd like to see how that looks in a minute here. It's a fat tire bike, and this is a fat tire. 24-inch diameter by 4 inches wide. So this should offer plenty of cushion while I'm riding. In addition to that, I saw there's a pretty nice suspension that we'll look at in a few minutes. There's also the small package in the box. I'm hoping that there's tools that I can use to assemble the bike. Hopefully these are the right tools. For bikes like this, normally I expect to be able to assemble the whole thing with the tools that are provided. They're decent Wellgo pedals, which Wellgo makes most of the lower price, higher quality pedals that I find on these bikes. And finally, there's a standard 54 volt 3 amp charging brick. All right, we have a Phillips head flathead screwdriver, 14, 17 millimeter wrench, 13 to 15 millimeter wrench, 8 to 10 millimeter wrench, and then we have a 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter, and 6 millimeter Allen keys. All right, so it looks like ENGWE gave us all the tools we need to at least get this axle off. I have had a couple of other bikes arrive with these axles like this that are almost impossible to get off without getting into my normal toolkit. Looks like we got hydraulic disc brakes, which are awesome. And one of the main reasons I like to get these wheels installed first is I do have a bike stand somewhere, but since I'm just building this at home in my driveway, it's easiest to get the wheel on first and then just stand it up on the kickstand so I can get the handlebars installed. So my axle came with these safety latches, but they're not needed for this style of fork. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull those off, get them out of the way. All right, this wheel is going on no problem, quick and easy. So let me get this thing standing up and on its kickstand. So I've got to install this kickstand real quick. I've got this bike precariously leaning against this stool, so hopefully it doesn't fall over. Let me stop talking to get the kickstand installed so it doesn't fall over. These two 5 millimeter Allen bolts came pre-installed on the kickstand, so I'm gonna get these off. And then too easy. All right, let me get some of this mess cleaned up so I can have a better workspace. I lost one of these copper staples, so I need to be on the lookout so I don't get a puncture in my tire from losing that thing. So off the bat, one of the first things I'm noticing is this super beefy suspension. There are actually 3 shocks in the suspension system. There's a shock up front right here, and then these 2 shocks in the back. So this thing must have some either super stiff travel or super smooth travel. So my next order of business is getting this super plush, soft seat installed. And as someone who rides bikes, not just electric bikes, sometimes having a plush seat like this isn't the best for power transfer. But in this case, because you're probably just going to be using the throttle, a soft seat will make the ride that much more comfortable. Add that to the suspension, I honestly can't wait to see how it feels. I'm going to use the 6mm Allen key and check that out. Wow. It has a pretty interesting looking LED tail light. I'm curious to see how bright that is in the night. It's pretty good. And then also over here, it looks like you plug in the battery. Wait, is this the battery right here? You just, oh man, that thing is, that's long. It's got like a plastic bottom, so I guess if you drop it, this thing weighs, this is like a third of the weight right here. This thing weighs like 20 or 30 pounds. While I've got this out, you can see that little 6mm Allen key right there. So that's what we need to put the seat together. Not only am I racing the rain here, but it's like 90 degrees out. The sun's not even out. It's so hot. There's almost nothing I can do to stop sweating here. All right, that feels good. Feels pretty level. Oh, there's a battery power button right there. We got some nice leather or faux leather hand grips, and those handlebars sit on there nice and easy. Because of the way this display sits here, and the display has its own bracket on it, those display brackets are doing a pretty decent job of holding the handlebars in place. And I don't think I'm going to beat that rain. I hear a little rain coming in right now, so let me stop talking and get this thing put together. And I'm not trying to say the cable feels weak or anything, but the cable does run right in front of this pinch point on the suspension. So it's like at the end of it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if the suspension goes down and for some reason this thing jostles in here, I could see that getting pinched right here and possibly ripping this cable, or somehow jerking this cable hard enough that it could break this outlet right here. So this is going to have to be monitored to make sure there's nothing going wrong with this cable. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this tail light mounted up. I wonder what this and the LEDs will look like at night. The last thing I have to install is this seat pad, so it has these 4 knobs that hold it from coming up, and then 1 screw that will hold it in place on the rack right here. So when it's in place, it'll look something like that. I think besides the pedals, this is the last item I have to put together. Yes, it did come with the correct tool, but I don't want to play this game. All right, can I reach that with my screwdriver? Time to get these Well-Go pedals installed, and then I should be good to start my test ride. And when you're installing your pedals, make sure you put the left pedal on the left side and the right pedal on the right side. They do have different threadings, and so it's very small, but you can see a little L. So that's the left side, or the driver's side if this was like a car. Now I'm just gonna take that pedal, I'm gonna put it in and thread it a couple times, and then just spin it in reverse a little bit. And that pretty much got it seated. And normally with pedals, you're gonna wanna use that 15 mil. So let's see. Yep, 15 mil is the way to go. And you don't have to break it to get it seated. Same thing on this side. Pedal in reverse a little bit. And once it gets seated, give it a good little quarter turn with that 15 mil. So for this, I'm gonna use a 10mm wrench on the back to hold that nut from moving. There are no fenders for this bike, and it is an off-road folding bike. Okay. All right, guys, it's time to dust off this helmet and channel my inner daredevil. Wish me luck. Oh. The max insert line for me is still a little too high. At 5'9", I'm still a little bit overextended. So I'm gonna go ahead and lower that seat another couple of inches. There is a little barrel key plug, and this barrel key plug is here to fully lock the quick release on the seat in place. All right, I've got all the adjustments made. I'm about to test ride the bike for a real test ride. Got about 45% on the battery, and I'm gonna go ahead and bump it up to 5. Off the bat, for the US market, this throttle should be on the other side. The back brake and the throttle should be on the right hand side. At least the brakes are correct, but the throttle needs to be moved over. So it's actually kind of fun to ride. I can feel that the tires are a little bigger than what I'm used to, which is the 20-inch bikes. Those 20-inch bikes, I want to say they're probably a little more responsive at slower speeds. This feels more like a motorcycle than a pit bike compared to those 20-inch fat tire bikes. I'm going to put a little bit of air in the back tire to make sure I don't get a flat. 20 PSI, huh? So I'm going to pump that up to, we're about 25 now. The thing about fat tire bikes is if you are riding aggressively, then those tires do have a tendency to squish a little bit in the curves. And since I'm potentially a little more of an aggressive rider, I got to make sure I have plenty of air in those tires so I don't mess them up. All right, so let's hit the road again. The bike does have a Shimano Tourney 8-speed shifter. It's a decent gear if you're climbing with the pedal assist on. I feel like the gear is a little steep for climbing if you run out of battery. It's not necessarily the easiest gear to climb with. And since I've been aggressively riding around with this bike for the last 20 minutes or so, I've gone from a battery percentage of 45 to 34. So I probably need to charge this thing up completely before I ride it anymore, but it's just so much fun. And I'm just pedaling because I'm going one-handed and I like to keep my hand on the right-hand side of the bike, because when I have to hit the brakes, I want to hit that back brake so I don't go either flying over the handlebars or, in this case, because it's a fat tire bike, lock up that front tire in the gravel. Either way, I'll try to go fully throttle assist so you guys can see that this thing actually rips with just the throttle. Most of these electric bikes do pretty good nowadays anyway. One thing I like about this one versus some of the other ones I've recently tested is, and I'm not sure if this is because of the suspension, the full suspension, but I'm not hearing any bouncing or dinging as I'm hitting bumps or rolling through this gravel. So the bike actually handles pretty good and sounds good. It feels good. All right, guys, let's see what we got on the screen. Just trolling around my yard. It looks like I've gone about a mile or 1.5 miles. Currently putting out 0 power, which makes sense. I've been riding for only 6 minutes and I've hit 29.3 miles per hour with an average speed of 14.3 miles per hour. So needless to say, this bike pretty much rips, which is awesome. It is a little heavier than I'm used to for these electric bikes. So if you are planning to get this and you live in like an apartment, it's going to be a chore to bring it up and down stairs. But if you're just lifting it into something like the back of your vehicle, it shouldn't be too much of a chore. And because this is the X24 with the 24-inch tires, it has a bigger footprint than I would expect that X20 to have. But so far, it feels like I'm riding on a motorcycle, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, that throttle just takes off. There's not much to it. Just like that, hitting about 20, which is a little uncomfortable one-handed, but it's definitely not too crazy in this more controlled environment that I'm in. So this bike's been charging for quite a while, and I've been trying to figure out why it's taking so long to charge it up. Well, it turns out that there are actually 2 batteries on this bicycle. The first battery is in the seat tube right here, and I pulled that out earlier, and that thing is like that thick, and it feels like it weighs about 20 pounds. And the second battery is actually inside of the frame right here. I wonder if I'll be able to see it if I open this up. First things first, have I mentioned I'm not really a fan of folding bikes, but this is pretty unique. There's a battery right here in the frame, and there's a little key that holds it in place. Let's pull it out and see what it looks like inside. Okay, so I looked it up, and the battery in the frame says in the literature that it's a 9.6 amp hour, and this one's supposed to be 19.2. So between the two of them, we're looking at 28.8 amp hours of battery life, which is a lot of battery. So this bike should be able to go around 63 miles without pedaling on a single complete state of charge. And you could possibly get almost 100 miles with pedaling on that same single state of charge. So this thing has some massive battery power. And also, typically these bikes come with a 750 watt max hub motor. Couple notes. First, that is a little more powerful. That could explain why this has a top speed of 31 miles per hour. And then second, check your local laws to make sure that this thing will be street legal if that's something that concerns you. Okay, so I still am a little confused about this button right here. I have this cable plugged into this battery. There's also a battery in here. And when I turn on the button on this battery, the percentage goes up on the display here. So right now it's showing 95% and it's slowly creeping up. But if I turn this button off, give this a few seconds to catch up, that should drop back down again. And there we have it. It already dropped down to 93. So I'm a little curious if somehow the battery in the seat tube is actually providing some charge to the battery in the frame, sort of topping that one off and making sure that we don't run out of power. Or is the system running off of both batteries at the same time? The battery in the seat tube is definitely the larger of the two batteries. It's essentially 2/3 of the battery capacity in the seat tube and 1/3 of the battery capacity in this main part of the frame. Either way, I feel like it's time for another test ride. And since I've turned off that other battery, I've actually dropped down to 77%. And it looks like it might still be declining a little bit, 78%. So maybe it evened off right there. For now, I'll go ahead and keep this button on and we'll cruise a little bit more just to see what we can do with this bike. Definitely picking up some mud on these tires, so glad that they're a fat tire. And I would like to emphasize, I am going pretty fast, and so these tires are meant for a slow speed. As I'm hitting some of those sharper curves, I am squishing those tires a little bit. So if you do plan to run this at its 30 mile per hour range, I would definitely recommend bumping up your PSI so you have that firmer ride. But if you're planning to cruise around nice and slow, those 24 by 4-inch tires give you plenty of internal suspension on top of the shocks that we already have here. And I did mention we do have 3 shocks on that back suspension, so 2 of which you can control with the spanner wrench. The suspension is nice and soft and it allows plenty of travel, which I don't feel like I bottomed out at all with the suspension, because between the 2 aluminum red shocks and the center shock right there, this thing feels very smooth. So I am curious how these brake lights look. Oh, you can see the brake light in the seat there. It's pretty interesting. So we got those 2 brake lights. All right, guys, so I can't seem to get the headlights to stay on. They definitely work. If you know how these headlights work, let me know in the comments. Because I like to ride these bikes on the street sometimes. I like to leave it so the headlight's always on when I'm moving. Not exactly sure why those lights are not kicking on. Another thing I wanted to see is how much power does this say I'm getting? Ooh, wow. Okay. As I'm holding the throttle, the power seems to be going up to almost 1500 watts on that gauge there. So I don't know if that gauge is correct, or so maybe the rated or the nominal power of the motor is 1000 watts, but this thing will spike up to 1500 watts, you know, going up some hills. I guess the only way I'll really know if I'm getting that 1500 watts is if I go up that hill. I could do a hill test, because on some other bikes with 750 watt motors, the bike will kind of steady state around 4 miles per hour up this super steep hill. But if this bike will make it up with even 6 miles per hour, then I would assume that that motor is actually putting out that power, which 1500 watts is a lot of power. So let's check it out. Okay, so the camera view does not do this hill justice, but I'm currently hitting about 9 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour, 11 miles per hour. and I'm hitting the steepest part of this hill, bogging down to 8. Let's see what we got. 6, 5, 3, and 10 miles per hour going up this hill. So normally going up this hill, I hit about 10 miles an hour on that straightaway, and then as I hit the steepest part, I go down to about 4 miles per hour, which is basically what I got for this test right here. So I think the nominal motor power of about 1,000 watts sounds about right. 750 and 1,000 watts is a very small difference, and that number usually is not going to be as accurate as something like the torque of the motor. In this case, the torque I think was 70 Newton meters, which sounds about right for a 1,000 watt motor. And in the long run, the 1,000 watt motor isn't going to be significantly more powerful than a 750 watt motor. You know, for context, 550 watts, I believe, is about 1 horsepower. So we're talking about the difference between 1.5 horsepower and 2 horsepower. You know, there's not much of a difference between 1.5 and 2 horsepower versus something like me saying, oh, it's 1 horsepower or 10 horsepower. Now, 10 horsepower is significantly more powerful than 1 horsepower. It's an order of magnitude more powerful, whereas 750 watts versus 1,000 watts isn't a huge difference. Either way, this bike is still a blast to ride. And so we're gonna keep this bike in the stable so that the kids can ride it over the next few months. And I'll post any issues that arise in the comments. And if you have any questions about the bike, feel free to ask me in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you on my next adventure. So as I've been riding, I've noticed this brake cable is making contact with that tire. This is just a good time to take a second to remind you, with these kind of bikes that you assemble yourself, either pay a bike shop to put them together, or take your time and really go over and make sure there's nothing binding, scraping, anything like that. These bikes are mass produced, and I don't think there's a problem necessarily with the quality of them. They run great. I haven't had any problems with these bikes myself, but I believe that's because when I do assemble these bikes myself, I go over and check every nut and bolt. And even then, I do occasionally find something loose later when I re-inspect. I'm not saying it's a hard job to put these bikes together, but if you are gonna do this yourself, do take your time and make sure that all of the bolts are properly torqued. Regardless, I guess it could be fun to ride around with no handlebars for a little bit, at least until you crash. So thanks again for watching. Again, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you on my next adventure.